and informative blog, featured on CNN Money, consistently ranked as a top 10 peer informative attorney by Expertise Connections, a human resources consultant, expert, and advocate. Informational, inspirational, and entertaining. One of the most talked about and progressive shows on social media. Legal Views with attorney Sheila R. Stuart.
Welcome to Legal Views with attorney Sheila R. Stuart. We are so excited to have you with us on this evening. We have two distinguished guests with us in the studio. We have attorney Steve Harmon from St. Louis, Missouri, and attorney James Lamb from New York, New York. And we are going to discuss the Tyree Nichols case, justice for Tyree Nichols. But first, we want to give you a little bit about the show. We are located at 231 South Bemiston Avenue, Clayton, Missouri, and we are in Suite 800, 63105. You can contact us at law@SheilaStewart.com, law@SheilaStewart.com. And we're now currently airing on numerous platforms: Apple TV, Daily Gospel Network, Daily Gospel International, Amazon Fire TV, Facebook, YouTube, and Roku. You can also follow us under attorney Sheila R. Stuart. Thank you for being with us on today. Welcome, gentlemen. How are you doing this evening?
Fine, thank you.
Good evening. Doing well. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to be with us on today. I want to just give you a quick overview regarding our special guests on today, and then we're going to turn it over to them to discuss this serious case, this serious matter that's taking place right now in Memphis, Tennessee. Steve Harmon is a former police officer. He rose to the ranks as a lieutenant here in St. Louis, Missouri. Now he is a prominent attorney in the St. Louis metropolitan area. Attorney James Lamb hails from New York, and he was a former prosecutor, and now he is a criminal defense attorney. These two gentlemen are going to give you their views as it relates to police reform and the case that must be proven and disproved for these officers that have been accused of murdering Tyree Nichols. But at first, I want to just give you a quick timeline of what took place in his life. On January the 7th, 2023, Tyree Nichols was pulled over for allegedly driving reckless. To this day, we do not know why he was really pulled over. On January the 10th, Tyree Nichols died. He died 3 days later after being beaten and detained by the Memphis police. On January the 18th, the federal investigations began. The United States Attorney for the Western District of Tennessee, Kevin Ritz, announced that the FBI and the DOJ, the Department of Justice, were conducting an investigation into the incident. On January the 20th, the Memphis police officers were fired. They were fired for this murder. On January the 23rd, the family describes the body camera footage that showed this horrible, heinous, and violent, appalling act that had taken place against Tyree Nichols. On January the 26th, an independent autopsy was released, and the officers were charged with second-degree murder, aggravated assault, aggravated kidnapping, resulting in bodily injury. And now we're going to stop there with the timeline because we want to hear from our guests. Steve, I want you to open this discussion up, and tell us, what are your thoughts as it relates to policing in America today, and what can we do differently to change the direction we are going in?
Okay, well, first I'll say as far as policing in America today, there's pretty much nationwide distrust of law enforcement, especially in communities of color. Some of the things I think that we could do or law enforcement can do better to try and remedy and rectify some of this mistrust that the community has is I would first start with better training for law enforcement. Because what we have
Okay.
right now, we have departments that train their officers, but there's no nationwide standardized training for law enforcement. That would be the first thing I would do. Some of our officers are rural areas, some are in urban areas, some departments are smaller that don't have the budgets to do training that large departments have. Secondarily, I would look at police supervision. What we saw here in Memphis with Tyree Nichols, there was no supervision anywhere at the scene. There was no sergeant, there was no lieutenants, there were no commanders. You had officers out there basically unsupervised.
Okay.
To add to that, you had these officers, the 5 of them. I think the most senior officer probably had been a police officer for about 5 or 6 years. That never should have occurred, especially in a unit such as that. And lastly, I would add that there should be swift accountability for officers for violations of their department policies and especially for violations of the law. Because sometimes it may take months for an investigation for an allegation of misconduct or a violation of the law. And sometimes it could take years before anybody is held accountable, if they ever are. But I think that if officers were swiftly held accountable, such as this case, I think that would go a long way in rectifying some of the issues that we have with law enforcement today.
I mean, your answer to that question was superior and it's well thought out. But why is it that we aren't seeing this? I mean, I've heard similar responses before. Why do you think it's so difficult to implement these changes?
Well, primarily because you have police associations, police units, fraternal order of police organizations who are strong advocates for law enforcement, and they lobby well. And for whatever reason, the legislators have not enacted laws that would assist the citizens or would hold officers accountable.
You also are a graduate of the FBI Quantico training program. Do you think having more advanced training, you were very successful as a police officer, you became a lieutenant in the police department. Do you think the extra training that you received with the FBI made you more effective? Do you think the primary training that officers get when they come in is so lacking that it's destined for serious problems in the long run?
Well, so there's 2 types of training. So you spoke about my training I received at the FBI National Academy at Quantico, Virginia. So that training was basically for police commanders. It was a management type leadership training that took place over a number of months. I think I was there about 3 months. However, when officers attend police academies, depending on your state and depending on the size of the department, the training may vary. Generally, there's about close to 1,000 hours of training for police officers in Missouri now. And throughout that training, they get trained on, obviously, on the law. They get trained on defensive tactics. They get trained on how to patrol, how to do report writing, so on and so forth. And then generally, when they graduate from the police academy, they go out on a field training with what should be an experienced, seasoned police officer that can kind of guide them and train the officers for anywhere from 90 days to maybe 6 months before they're out on their own, so to speak. But it all depends on, again, the size of the department and the budget that that police department or that city may have, as well as other staffing issues. Right now, there's a staffing shortage for police officers nationwide. Nobody wants to be the police now. So a lot of police departments are short-staffed.
Mm-hmm. Okay. James,
Yes.
Welcome. Welcome, James. How are you this evening?
I'm doing very well, thank you.
What are your thoughts in terms of the analysis? Let's start with the defense first, because the tape will make the case pretty easy. Nothing is open and shut, obviously, in the law, but the tape and, the death will make it a little easier for the prosecution. What do you think the officers are facing as it deals with the defense of such a terrible situation?
Well, the first thing we always have to keep in mind is that these cases are generally in front of a jury. So it's a situation where you don't have a judge making a decision in terms of guilt or innocence. You have a jury. And as a general rule, these are felonies. You're going to have 12 private citizens who have been fully screened beforehand, making a decision in terms of whether or not the prosecutors have proven their case beyond a reasonable doubt. And that's really, really, really the key. It should be a decision that's made without any bias, without the influence of outside sources. But we have here, this is a situation where you have an incident, at least a portion of the incident, that's on video and has been broadcast probably around the world, but definitely in the area where this trial will be happening.
Mm-hmm.
And it's going to be an uphill burden, in all likelihood, for the people that are being charged.
Okay. This unit called the Scorpions that these officers were working in, this unit was allegedly created to Scorpions to police in high crime areas. How can the community feel safe, Steve, when we have these units that's on the ground policing in these communities and individuals are being treated this way? How do we feel safe? What do we do about units like this? How do we handle units like this?
Well, first I would start with that the name, the Scorpions, that name should have never been associated with law enforcement. That name in and of itself sends an instantly clear message that these are highly aggressive officers that should be feared. And so when you see the Scorpions pull up, everybody should fear them because there's no telling what's about to happen. And most cities have units similar to this. They're commonly known across the country as the Jump Out Boys. We had them here in St. Louis, and that's what everybody in the neighborhood knew them as. Okay, here comes the Jump Out Boys. They would usually be younger officers, generally wearing, plain clothes and unmarked cars. And they would literally just roll up and jump out and everybody against the wall, or, start frisking and searching and everything. And I think that should not occur, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
But on the other hand, units such as that, if done properly with the proper supervision and training, play a important role for law enforcement. Because in some communities, obviously, a marked car cannot pull up with officers in uniform and effectively deal with some of the criminal element that's out there. Everyone knows right now that their crime is at an all-time high across the country in most urban cities in America. And we have to have some way to address the crime issue. But in this particular case here in Memphis with the Jump Out Boys, or what was called there, the Scorpions, that was just something that was an aberration of policing that we should have in our communities. So policing will not change until they are being held accountable for incidents such as like this. And one thing I think would go a long way for that would be the passage of the George Floyd bill, which is being debated again, and hopefully we can get some traction across the country and we can get that passed.
Yes, I'm hoping that that bill will pass this time. Also, it's going to be difficult, but we need to reform the way we police in America. And I believe until we can have fundamental change in America concerning the way we police, individuals eventually are going to take up arms on their own and fight against organized police departments. And we don't want the country to come to that. But when you continue to see these types of incidents over and over and over again, it creates fear, especially among African American men. I would like both of you gentlemen to sound in on how do we diminish the fear in African American communities among Black men, especially Black men, or people of color in general, when they continue to witness these types of heinous acts unfolding on TV?
Well, I used to tell people that we need more African American younger males to become police officers and to join the police departments, and they could affect the change, because what we previously witnessed when we see unarmed young African American men killed at the hands of law enforcement was generally at the hands of a white police officer. Now we have an incident where there are 5 African American police officers who killed an innocent, unarmed African American man. So what does that say when you go out and tell them, well, you also become police officers because you can affect the change, when now we have that same element doing the same thing? I really don't have an answer for that. It's one of those things that how did this happen? How did we get here?
Right. So horrible.
But I would say that, in my opinion, there's this movement of defunding the police. I don't think defunding the police is necessarily the answer. Possibly using some of those funds to redirect some of the law enforcement efforts. But I do know that there are 2 things that the public fears: criminals and the police.
Oh, wow.
So we need to do something different to where crime and criminals will always be feared, but we need to change the police so we no longer fear them.
Okay. Your thoughts, James?
Well, I think, and it's something that I've shared with officers for most of my career as a prosecutor, and especially with young officers, is to always remind the officers that your basic responsibility and part of the oath that you take when you become a police officer is to protect and serve.
Mm-hmm.
And in protecting and serving the community that you're policing, your attitude has to be that the people that you're protecting, those are your employers. And you're there to hopefully help to make that environment that they're living in a safe environment. And your role is to protect the people that are residing in that neighborhood. The complexion of the neighborhood is irrelevant. It's irrelevant. If the police officer has in their mind that I'm here as a servant of this community, that my responsibility is to protect and to serve this community, I think we'll be going at least in a positive direction. But just as the police officers have that responsibility, it's up to the people that are in the community to realize that the police officer is not their enemy. And that their responsibility is to do things in a lawful manner, in a relatively lawful manner. If we can get to those things, then we put a lot of these problems behind us.
I mean, okay, James, I hear you, but that sounds like almost a utopia. Okay. I mean, obviously, we're supposed to do the right thing, and the police are supposed to do the right thing, but people are not doing the right thing. And that's why people are fearful of the police. And so, in my opinion, we need to try to think about how do we turn the corner on this. And like Steve was saying, when you see this, when you see Black officers attacking another young Black man in such a heinous way that results in his death, okay? How do you now tell young men of color not to be afraid? They're going to be afraid. And when they get pulled over, you see George Floyd, you see Tyree Nichols, and the list go on and on and on. How can we get young people not to be afraid if the police pulls them over? Because the evidence suggests that they may not live through it.
Well, but and I know what I'm about to say is it's a difficult thing. But if you have, and I don't care what the complexion is of the person, you have a police officer that pulls you over if you're driving a car, or even if you're walking down the street, and a police officer says, "Sir, can I speak to you for a moment?" Comply with the request. If you think that you haven't done anything, it's not about, if you think you haven't done anything, comply with the request.
Mm-hmm.
And when questions are asked of you, articulate your position. If
Mm-hmm.
you're in a neighborhood, well, the reason I'm here is I'm going to my friend's house, or I'm on my way going home, and try to keep the incident as calm as possible. Now, that same thing that I'm saying with regard to the people that are being stopped goes for the person that's doing the stopping. That police officer, you're approaching someone. As you're approaching someone, as you're approaching the person, if you see a deadly weapon in their hands or a dangerous weapon in their hand, sir, drop the weapon. Ma'am, drop the weapon. Try to do everything you can to normalize the situation or to defuse the situation. You make that attempt. It will work at times and sometimes it won't work. But if both sides take the position that police officers are there to protect and serve, they work for the city. And the police officers take the position that I'm here to protect and serve. If I see a person with something that appears to be a handgun, ask a question first.
Okay.
You don't take deadly action and then ask questions. Try as best you can to ask questions first.
Okay.
I know it sounds, it may sound simple the way I'm articulating it. And you said, but in the real world, it really doesn't work quite that way. But it can. If the officers are trained and if the officers believe that this person is not a threat, if I'm driving my car down the street and a police officer pulls my car over, make sure that they can see your hands if you're driving an automobile, so someone doesn't think that and don't be reaching into a glove compartment while the officer is trying to approach. Do everything you can to comply with the request that they're making. Give me your license and your registration. don't go reaching in your glove compartment for your license and registration as the officer is approaching.
Okay.
Why?
Okay.
Because it can be perceived.
James, I want to move. James, I want to move to. I don't mean to cut you off, but we're almost out of time. But I want to move to this other question, and I want both of you all to respond to this. How do we stop criminalizing Black men in our culture today? What can we do today to stop criminalizing Black men and men of color? So that when white officers see Black men, when Black officers see Black men, that they're not criminalized. How do we stop doing that?
Well, I don't know if there's a way to actually do that. I think that would be more of a cultural shift or a cultural change, not only for African American men or young men or African American people in general, because part of our culture is our behavior, is our attitude, our dress, our speech, our mannerisms. Everything about us emanates from our culture.
Mm-hmm.
And conversely, the same thing with police officers. You know, police officers are trained in a certain way. There's a certain culture in law enforcement that officers behave a certain way, that they address certain situations a certain way. And then you have that clash between these different cultures. And so I don't know how you could change, in the case of African Americans, decades of how our culture is now. I don't mean centuries going back, hundreds of years, but our current culture probably goes back decades. My parents and my parents' parents, but with law enforcement, you're talking about a culture that probably goes back 150 years. And so to change that to where we would, quote, decriminalize Black males in the eyes of law enforcement, I don't know exactly how we would do that.
Okay. Do you think we could have, do you think this training and biases, that's just not enough at the stage where we are now? Don't think that's going to work, or you think it's too far gone?
Well, I don't know if it would work or not. I mean, we've had racial sensitivity was what it was called back in the day, and then it later turned into different types of training. You had implicit bias. You've had now it's diversity, equity, and inclusion, whatever you want to call it. Today, we've had training for law enforcement like that for the past several decades, and we still have the same problems that we have. So it goes back again to, like I said, the culture of people. How do you change a person's mindset that they've had for many years? So I don't have the answer for that myself. I wish I could answer that.
Okay, but no, that's excellent. Basically, you're saying we've been working on this problem for decades, and we still have not resolved it. James, correct. What are your thoughts?
Well, my thought goes to us looking at a young police officer here in New York City that was killed. And we've got to kind of, by, a person that was not a police officer, we've got to get to the point that it's going to be difficult to get the population to realize that the police are there to protect and serve. Because if you have someone that injures or kills a relative or a friend of yours in your neighborhood or wherever, what are you going to do? The first thing you're going to do is you're calling 911, and you're not calling 911 to get to reach a psychologist. That's not the reason that you're calling 911. So you have to have that attitude. It may take a while, but you've got to have that attitude 24/7. that the police are there. They're there to work with me. If you have in your mind constantly that the police are there against me, then you're not going to cooperate with police officers, and you're going to escalate these kind of situations occurring. Because the young man that was killed in New York, the young officer that was killed here in New York, relatively he was less than 30 years old. And we look at the situations where we have citizens that are injured by police officers. It's not a one-way street. It's definitely not a one-way street. We've got to understand, private citizens have to understand that there's certain things that you can do and certain things you shouldn't do. Police officers have to understand there's certain things that you do, certain things you just don't do. Is it going to take time? Absolutely. And does it mean that you get people of color joining the police department and that's going to solve the problem? The Nichols case shows you that that's not necessarily the problem. It has to be an attitudinal change.
I think also, if I can add to that, would be that we need to address the issue within our culture of not cooperating with law enforcement. And some of it, primarily a large part of that, is out of mistrust and fear of law enforcement. But I think another large part of that is that we just don't cooperate with the police. It's just not cool. It's not something that we do. You had the whole thing of the no snitching thing that was big, which still is, but for whatever reason, we don't tend to cooperate with law enforcement. And like I said, it's either out of fear and mistrust, or it's just not something that we generally do, which causes a lot of, I think, unnecessary conflict in encounters with people of color and law enforcement.
But unfortunately, it transcends racial background. There are people of all backgrounds that, because of the retribution that they may sustain, they don't want to cooperate with law enforcement. And a lot of it, it'll never hit the news. You'll never see it. Mm-hmm. But it's across the board.
Well, as a disclaimer, I do want to state that we definitely want to recognize all of the police officers that put their lives on the line every day, not knowing if they will come home alive, children, young children, a wife, and they get up every morning and they make a decision to uphold the law, to protect, to serve, and they're good, clean officers, and people are shooting at them and not respecting them. We're concerned about those officers as well. It is a serious divide in this country. And we know that there are good, clean, honest police officers. And the police officers that did this heinous act against Tyree Nichols cannot represent all of the police officers in America. We definitely want to say that. And the other thing I want to add is that I am not in favor of defunding the police. I believe in training and more training. I think that the police departments are negligent. That's a great word for negligent in their training and hiring of police officers. I think the first error is who they hire, and then the second error is how they train these people. Some of these individuals should not even make it to the police department, but because there's a shortage and we need to fill those jobs, we're putting people in jobs that do not belong in those jobs, and then they're not properly trained, and it's a recipe for disaster. And I think that's a big problem in America. You saw it in Texas at the Uvalde when those officers would not go in to help those children that were being shot. They were just poorly trained, fearful, just terrible police officers.
No.
And I think we need to work on that. We're out of time, but before we go off the air, I want to thank you. You guys have been tremendous. I want to thank you for coming on and giving your thoughts and sharing with us one today. Before we go off the air, I would like for James and Steve to have the last few words.
Well, the only last word I would say is, if you in the community believe that we have the wrong kind of people as police officers, why don't you look into taking the exam yourself? If you think that you could be a better kind of person to protect and serve your neighborhoods.
Okay. Steve?
Well, I would say that until police officers are held accountable and can also hold each other accountable, that things won't change. Officers need to be able to do their job in such a manner that if they see something wrong conducted by another fellow police officer, that they should feel comfortable in being able to report it and take action, or to, stop the officer from doing whatever it is that they're doing. And like I say, report it. But until officers are in a position where they can feel comfortable doing that without having repercussions from their department or fellow officers, I think things will not change at all. So we need to be able to have our officers held accountable, and we need to pass the George Floyd bill.
Very good. And get rid of sovereign immunity.
That's part of the George Floyd bill.
Definitely get rid of it. Well, if it doesn't pass, let's get rid of sovereign immunity. Let's put that to rest forever. Well, thank you, gentlemen, for being with us on today. We thank you for your expertise, and we look forward to having you back soon. Thank you so much.
Thank you for joining us on Legal Views with attorney Sheila